Stop, a quiet voice cut through the panic. You're only making it worse. Marcus Vance, the billionaire owner of the tower, stared from the corner of the trapped VIP elevator. His young, arrogant executive Richard spun around. "Excuse me." Richard sneered his eyes, landing on the old cleaning lady in the grey uniform. "Your job is to hold a mop, not give technical advice." But the old woman ignored him. She stepped past the two powerful men, her gaze fixed on the flashing red error codes on the control panel. She was just the janitor, the invisible woman who cleaned their offices every night. So why was she about to do something that would leave the billionaire speechless and change everything forever? Stay with us to see what happens next. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that will touch your heart. The soft chime of the VIP elevator was the only sound that dared to interrupt the sterile silence as it ascended Ethelred Tower. Inside the world was a capsule of cold glass and polished steel, a reflection of the man at its center. Marcus Vance stood motionless, a titan in a bespoke suit, his presence filling the space with an authority that needed no words. He was the architect of this empire, a man who had clawed his way from nothing, and now commanded a world that ran on data logic and his own unforgiving will. His company had just completed a brutal but necessary round of layoffs, a strategic move in a market terrified of the coming AI wave. It was a sign of strength, he told the board, a necessary amputation to save the body. Opposite him, a young, ambitious executive named Richard prattled on about quarterly growth metrics, his voice a slick, eager hum. In the corner, a uniformed security guard. Frank stood stoically, a man in his late 50s who had seen men like Richard come and go for 30 years. And in the other corner, almost blending into the brushed metal, was the fourth passenger, an old cleaning lady named Elena. Head bowed, she clutched the handle of her utility cart, making herself as small and invisible as possible. Marcus glanced at the vintage watch on his wrist, a nervous tick he could never shake. It was his father's, and it always ran exactly 5 minutes slow, a constant irritating reminder of a past he had conquered, a time when he controlled nothing. He hated the feeling. Then it happened. A violent lurch, a groan of tortured metal, and then silence. The panoramic view of the city vanished into absolute darkness before emergency lights flooded the cabin in a hellish crimson glow. The elevator was dead, suspended in the abyss between the 48th and 49th floors. What the hell was that? Richard yelped, his polished composure shattering like glass. Frank the guard moved to the control panel, his movements practiced. He pressed the intercom. Nothing. "Comms are out, sir. The entire grid might be down." "Move!" Richard snapped, shoving him aside. "I know the manual override protocol." He stabbed frantically at the touch screen, his panic making his movements clumsy. The screen flickered, then displayed a single terrifying message in stark red letters. "System lockout. Colonel Panic." "You fool," Marcus snarled, his voice a low growl. "You just bricked the entire system." The loss of control was a physical sickness in his gut. It was then that a quiet, heavily accented voice cut through the tension. "Stop. You're only making it worse." Every head turned. Elena, the cleaning lady, had lifted her gaze from the floor. Her eyes, a startlingly intelligent blue, were not on them, but on the error codes flickering on the screen. Richard laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "Excuse me, your job is to hold a mop, not give technical advice." But Marcus held up a hand, silencing him. He was desperate. Logic had failed. Protocol had failed. He looked at the old woman. "Go on." She hesitated for a beat, then pointed a worn finger at the screen. "It's a logical loop. The initial power surge triggered a security protocol, but the reboot is trying to access a memory partition, that the protocol itself has locked. It's fighting itself. She spoke with a calm, diagnostic precision that felt utterly alien coming from someone in her uniform. The system needs to be rebooted from the command line. Directly. Ignoring Richard's sputtering disbelief, Elena stepped forward. She placed her cart aside and touched the very edge of the screen's bezel in 3 specific places, a sequence that no user manual would ever contain. A black window with a blinking cursor appeared, shocking Richard into silence. Her hands, chapped and aged from labor, moved over the virtual keyboard with an impossible steady grace. They didn't just type, they danced. A symphony of logic flowed from her fingertips onto the screen. The first line of code forced the panicked operating system to a halt. The next 2 bypassed the corrupted boot partition entirely. The 4th rerouted power directly to the hydraulic safety system. The 5th and 6th purged the error logs that were causing the loop. The 7th recalibrated the door sensors. The 8th initiated a soft reset of the primary motor. And the 9th line was a thing of simple, elegant genius, a single command to execute the sequence in a fail-safe mode. She pressed Enter. For a single breathless second, nothing happened. Then the red emergency lights blinked off, replaced by the cool white glow of the main lighting. With a gentle hum, the elevator resumed its silent upward journey. Frank let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Richard stared, his mouth agape. But Marcus Vance saw none of it. He was frozen, his mind reeling. It wasn't the fix that had stunned him into silence. It was the syntax, the elegant structure of the commands. It was written in a rare, almost forgotten variant of Pascal from the 1980s, a variant he had only ever seen one other person use. A brilliant, mysterious woman who had taught a poor, forgotten kid in a rundown community center how to find magic in logic 30 years ago. A mentor he knew only as E, a ghost from a life he had long since buried. And as he looked at the quiet, unassuming cleaning lady, now retreating back to her corner, a horrifying, impossible realization began to dawn in his mind. The heavy silence of the elevator was shattered by the gentle chime indicating their arrival. As the polished steel doors slid open, they revealed a scene of controlled chaos on the 80th floor. A team of anxious engineers and security staff stood waiting, their faces a mixture of relief and dread. They had been prepared for anything, a mechanical failure, a security breach, but not for the strange tableau before them. Richard, seeing his chance to reclaim authority, immediately stepped forward, his voice sharp and commanding. Full diagnostic on the entire lift system. Now I want a Level 1 incident report on my desk within the hour. Do you understand? But Marcus's attention was elsewhere. He didn't even glance at Richard. His gaze was fixed on the old cleaning lady, who was already trying to maneuver her cart discreetly toward a service corridor, eager to melt back into the invisibility she had occupied for 13 years. Richard Marcus said, his voice quiet, but carrying the cold weight of a glacier. The single word cut through all the other noise in the lobby. The young executive froze. Leave Marcus commanded, still not looking at him. For a moment, Richard just stood there, his face contorting from arrogance to disbelief, and finally to a deep, burning humiliation. He said nothing. He simply turned his shoulders stiff and walked away, the sound of his expensive shoes echoing his defeat. The assembled engineers stood in stunned silence, not daring to move. Marcus moved, then his steps deliberate. He walked past his top technical minds, past the head of building security, his path aimed directly at the woman in the grey uniform. The small crowd instinctively parted for him. Elena had her back to him, her hand gripping the handle of her cart, poised for escape. Marcus's voice was different now. It had lost its hard, executive edge. It was softer, more intense. Elena stopped, but she didn't turn around. "Could you give me 10 minutes of your time?" he asked. In my office. A junior executive standing nearby let out an audible gasp. Frank, the security guard who had been in the elevator with them, watched the scene unfold with an impassive face, but his eyes held a flicker of understanding. This was not normal. This was an event. Slowly, Elena turned. Her face was a mask of confusion and deep-seated weariness, the face of someone who expected trouble to be the only reason for being noticed. After a long pause, she gave a single curt nod. The walk to his penthouse office was silent. The corridor was lined with minimalist art that cost more than a suburban home. But Eleanor's eyes remained fixed on the floor ahead. When Marcus opened the heavy oak doors to his private office, the scale of the room seemed to suck the air out. It was a vast, cavernous space with a single massive desk and a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a god's-eye view of the entire city. It was a room designed to communicate absolute power and total isolation. In her simple janitor's uniform, Elena looked like a ghost from another world, a misplaced relic in a temple of modernity. Marcus gestured toward a severe, artistic-looking chair made of black leather and chrome. It looked more like a sculpture than a place to sit. "Please," he said. "Have a seat." Elena looked at the chair, then back at Marcus. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of her lips, a flicker of light in her tired eyes. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice dry as dust. "It looks more stable than the elevator just now." Marcus was taken aback. He had expected fear, or at least a nervous deference. He had not expected wit. For the first time since the crisis began, the icy tension in his chest loosened. He almost smiled back. He was looking at her now, truly looking, and seeing not just a janitor, but the shadow of someone else. Someone sharp. Someone brilliant. He sat behind his massive desk, a chasm of polished wood between them. He decided to start gently to circle the truth, rather than charge at it. He didn't mention the code. Not yet. "How long have you worked for Ethelred, ma'am?" he began. 13 years, sir." She answered, her voice returning to its flat, neutral tone. Her hands were folded in her lap, perfectly still. She was a fortress. "And you're from—" he prodded. "A long way from here," she said her answer, a polite but firm dead end. He could feel the walls she had built around herself, decades of practice in the art of being invisible. He knew that pressing further would only make them stronger. He had seen her genius for 9 lines of code, but the woman herself was a locked system. He leaned back in his chair, a flicker of frustration mixing with his awe. "Very well," he said, finally, his voice once again cool and professional. "You may return to your duties. Thank you for your time." Elena nodded, stood and left the room as quietly as she had entered, leaving Marcus alone with the silent, panoramic view of a city that felt for the first time like it was keeping a secret from him. He watched her go, his mind racing. Then he picked up his private encrypted phone and made a call to his head of security. "I need a deep background check," he said, his voice low. "On a janitorial staff member. Name is Elena Petrova. I want everything, and I want it to be discreet." Across the street, in the dim light of a high-end bar, Richard stared up at the single illuminated window of Marcus's penthouse. The humiliation was a fire in his veins, burning away his fear and leaving behind something cold and hard. He would not be dismissed. He would not be made a fool of by a CEO and his pet janitor. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over a contact. It was a reporter for a notoriously aggressive tech blog. He pressed the call button. The game had just begun. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing Marcus Vance inside his silent, cavernous office. The sound was a final punctuating note to the most chaotic hour of his professional life. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, the glittering expanse of the city laid out before him like a circuit board of his own design. He had built this. He controlled this. Every light, every data stream, every transaction was a testament to his will. Yet 20 floors below a system he owned had failed, and in that moment of absolute powerlessness, he had been saved not by his million-dollar engineers, but by the quiet woman who cleaned his floors. The logical, ruthless part of his brain, the part that had fired 300 people last quarter without losing a night's sleep, scrambled for a rational explanation. A coincidence, a lucky guess, a former hobby she had once picked up. But another part of him, an older, more instinctual part he had long suppressed, knew it was none of those things. The way she had diagnosed the kernel panic, the calm authority in her voice, the impossible elegance of her solution. It wasn't the knowledge of a hobbyist, it was the mastery of an architect. He turned from the window, the city lights feeling alien and distant. He picked up his private encrypted phone and dialed a single number. It rang once. Corbin Marcus said, his voice low and steady. "Sir," came the clipped professional reply from his head of security, a man who had spent 2 decades in the Mossad before Marcus had made him an offer he couldn't refuse. "I have a name," Marcus began. "Elena Petrova. She's on the janitorial staff, night shift rotation." He paused. "I want to know everything. Birth records, immigration status, education, employment history. I want to know where she was 30 years ago down to the month. And Corbin? So no one can know we're looking. Not a soul. This is level 0, for my eyes only." "Understood, sir." The line went dead. Marcus let out a slow breath and sank into his chair, the silence of the office pressing in on him. His hand, as if by its own will, went to his wrist. He unclasped the old watch his father had given him. The leather strap was worn smooth, the crystal face bearing a network of faint scratches, each one a memory. He tapped the glass. It was still running precisely 5 minutes behind. For years he had seen it as a symbol of his father's gentle, perpetual failure, a man always a step behind the world. A fate Marcus had sworn he would never share. But tonight, the watch felt different. It wasn't a symbol of failure. It was a portal. The scent of old floor wax and dusty books suddenly filled his mind, so potent it was almost real. The low hum of ancient beige computer terminals. And he was a boy again. 14 years old, skinny and hungry, hiding from the chaos of his neighborhood, in the one place that made sense, the poorly funded West Side Community Center. He was hunched over a second-hand computer, wrestling with a problem, his code, a clumsy, brute-force mess. He was stuck, angry, frustrated. "You are fighting the machine, little crow. That is why you are losing." The voice was soft, laced with a thick Eastern European accent. He looked up and saw E. That's all anyone knew her as. She was a refugee who volunteered at the center, a woman with sad, intelligent eyes who seemed to carry the weight of a lost world on her shoulders. She pointed a long, slender finger at his screen. "You use 10 lines of code to do the work of 1, she said gently. "The machine is not your enemy. It is a dancer. You must teach it the steps. Be elegant." She pulled up a chair, and for the next hour she didn't give him the answer. She taught him the philosophy. She introduced him to a strange, beautiful language called Pascal. She showed him how to build a loop so clean, so perfect, it was like poetry. She saw the raw, desperate hunger for knowledge in his eyes, and she fed it. She called him Little Crow, because of the way he would watch everything silently from the corners. She was the first person in his entire life who had looked at him and seen not a problem, but potential. Then one Tuesday, he came to the center and she was gone. No note, no explanation. The staff said her volunteer visa had expired. She had just vanished. The loss had left a hole in his life, a mystery he could never solve, and a quiet, burning determination to never be powerless or abandoned again. The memory receded, leaving Marcus sitting in the silent dark of his penthouse office. He was holding the old watch so tightly, his knuckles were white. The connection was impossible, insane, and yet undeniable. The accent, the calm instructional tone, and the code. That wasn't just Pascal in the elevator. It was her Pascal, her signature elegance, her philosophy. He thought of Richard's sneering dismissal. Your job is to hold a mop. It wasn't just arrogance. It was the profound blindness of a world that only saw the uniform, never the soul wearing it. A wave of protective anger, hot and fierce, surged through him. He had spent a lifetime building walls to keep the world out, to control every variable. Now the ghost who had given him the blueprints had been inside those walls the entire time, cleaning his floors. He stood up and walked back to the window, no longer seeing the city he had conquered. He was seeing the past, the present, and the future all converging on a single impossible truth. He was no longer investigating an employee. He was searching for a ghost he thought he had lost forever. "It's you," he whispered to the empty room, his voice tight with an emotion he hadn't felt in 30 years. After all this time, it has to be you. 2 days passed in a state of suspended animation. Marcus Vance went through the motions of being a CEO. He chaired meetings, signed off on acquisitions, and made decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but his mind was elsewhere. It was trapped in that elevator, replaying the moment an old woman's hands had danced across a screen, replaying the quiet, accented voice that had echoed a ghost from his past. He was a man adrift in a sea of data, waiting for the one piece of information that would either be an anchor or a stone that would pull him under. Late on the second night it arrived. A single encrypted file appeared on his private terminal. The sender was Corbin. The subject line was blank. Marcus felt his heart hammer against his ribs as he clicked it open. The file was stark, a collection of bullet points and fragmented records pieced together from the digital ether. Name Elena Petrova. Job 1963. Leningrad, USSR. Education PhD Computational Mathematics, Leningrad State University, 1985. Age 22. Ranked International Grandmaster, FID 1983. Professional Lead Programmer, Project Volkov defunct. Details classified, presumed related to state security informatics. Status vanished 1991. Following the August coup, her husband, a dissident journalist, was officially declared a state enemy and disappeared. Petrova was listed as a person of interest, believed to have fled the collapsing Soviet Union. U.S. arrival entered 1992 as a political refugee under a highly simplified identity. All prior credentials rendered void by geopolitical collapse and lack of verifiable records. Employment U.S. series of low-wage, non-documented positions. Cashier, seamstress, dishwasher. First documented employment custodial staff, Omnicorp Tower Building, later acquired by Ethelred Corp 13 years ago. Marcus read it 3 times. The cold factual report painted a life of brilliance shattered by history. A grandmaster, a PhD, a lead programmer on a classified project reduced to a ghost washing windows and emptying trash cans. The timeline was a perfect, brutal match. The woman he knew as E had been running for her life. He didn't use the intercom. He didn't send an assistant. The act of summoning her to his office now felt like a profound desecration. He left his penthouse and took the service elevator for the first time in his life. The smooth, silent descent of the VIP lift was replaced by the clanking and rattling of a utilitarian machine. The polished marble of the upper floors gave way to bare concrete walls, exposed pipes, sweating with condensation, and the sharp chemical smell of industrial cleaners. This was the engine room of his empire, a place he had never once set foot in. He found the custodial break room in a forgotten corner of the third sub-level. It was a small, stark space, with a formica table and a few mismatched plastic chairs under the unforgiving glare of a single fluorescent tube. And there she was, alone, sitting at the table, reading a tattered paperback novel, her worn uniform a shade of grey that seemed to absorb the harsh light. He entered the room so quietly, she didn't notice him at first. When she finally looked up, her eyes widened in alarm. She shot to her feet, instinctively smoothing down her uniform, the expression on her face, one of pure dread. She thought she was about to be fired. Marcus just stood there in the doorway, the polished shine of his $1,000 shoes, looking absurd on the scuffed linoleum floor. In his world, silence was a weapon, a tool to intimidate. Here in this small concrete room, his silence was one of awe and a grief so profound it stole his voice. He didn't know how to begin. So he used the only key he had. The 4, 2, do. Loop, he said, his voice barely a whisper, hoarse with an emotion he couldn't name. You told me it was the most elegant loop in Pascal. He took a step closer. You said it was like teaching a story to a machine, a story with a clear beginning and a clear end. The paperback book slipped from Elena's fingers and fell to the floor with a soft thud. The color drained from her face. Her hand flew to her mouth, and her eyes, those brilliant blue eyes, filled with a look of sheer, terrified disbelief. This wasn't a CEO. This was a ghost from her other life, speaking a language only the two of them had ever shared. Who are you? She breathed, her voice a trembling thread. He took one more step, closing the distance between them. You called me Little Crow, he said softly. That was the word that broke the dam. A sob, sharp and ragged, escaped her lips, a sound of 30 years of compressed fear and loss and suffocating silence. The disciplined mask she had worn for a lifetime crumbled, and the tears she had held back since the day her world ended began to fall, tracing paths through the lines on her tired face. I thought, she stammered, shaking her head in disbelief. How he didn't answer. He just waited as she told him everything, the words pouring out in a torrent. She spoke of her husband, the journalist who wrote one article too many, of the late-night knock on the door, of escaping with nothing but the clothes on her back and a false identity. She told him how upon arriving in America, her genius had become her greatest liability. It got you noticed. It made people ask questions. Being a janitor, being invisible. That was safety. That was armor. She confessed that she had seen his name in the news years ago when Ethelred Corp was just a start-up. She had recognized the little crow she had once mentored, but she was too terrified to ever reach out, certain that reconnecting with her past would bring its dangers crashing down on both of them. So she had watched from the shadows, cleaning the floors of his rising empire, her heart a mixture of pride and terror. Marcus listened, every word a blow to his soul. The man who prided himself on logic, on seeing every angle, had been blind to the most important truth of his own life. His success, his empire, his entire world was built on the foundation of this woman's brilliance and nurtured by the soil of her suffering. The debt he owed her was immeasurable. When she finished, there was nothing but the sound of her quiet weeping in the small, stark room. He wanted to say, "Thank you," but the words were too small. He wanted to say, "I'm sorry," but the words were an insult. So he just stood there, in the quiet humility of the moment, sharing the silence with her. The power dynamic that had defined their world just an hour ago was gone, shattered into a million pieces on the floor, along with her paperback book. He was no longer the billionaire CEO. She was no longer the janitor. They were the student and the lost mentor, finally reunited in the basement of the very empire she had unknowingly helped to create. And in the weight of that shared history, a new and fragile reality began to take shape. The day after the revelation in the basement, a fragile and unspoken truce settled over Ethelred Tower. By Marcus's direct and non-negotiable order, Elena Petrova was quietly removed from all janitorial duties. He had her discreetly escorted to an empty office on the 72nd floor, a floor currently undergoing a slow renovation, a ghost level, suspended between the building's bustling departments. He told her it was a temporary measure, a private space for her to think while he figured out the next move. She sat in the sterile, unfurnished room, still in her simple clothes, surrounded by unpacked boxes of state-of-the-art computer equipment, still wrapped in plastic. The contrast was dizzying. For 30 years, her identity had been her armor, Elena, the janitor, the invisible woman. Now that armor was gone, and she felt naked, exposed a ghost, haunting a life that was no longer hers in a new life that didn't yet fit. Marcus visited her that afternoon. The air between them was thick with the unspoken weight of 3 decades. He, the master of communication and command, found himself at a complete loss for words. He stumbled through an offer of financial compensation, a trust fund, a new house, anything she wanted. He was trying to solve the problem the way he always solved problems, by throwing immense resources at it. Elena simply shook her head, her gaze distant. "I have not been Elena Petrova for a very long time, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I am not sure who I am supposed to be now." She looked at her own hands, as if seeing them for the first time. A genius does not forget how to think. But a ghost can forget how to live. The words hit Marcus with the force of a physical blow. He had thought of this as a debt to be repaid, a logistical problem with a human face. He had not considered that the person he was trying to save might not know if she wanted to be found. While Marcus was wrestling with his conscience, Richard was nursing his wounded pride. In the cutthroat world of Ethelred Corp, humiliation was a death sentence. He knew his panicked incompetence in the elevator, witnessed by the CEO and a janitor, was a career-ending vulnerability. He couldn't let the true story come out. He had to frame the narrative first. He arranged a late lunch at an exclusive old money steakhouse downtown with David Peterson, the senior vice president of legacy systems. Peterson was a man of Richard's own ilk, a corporate creature who had risen through connections and office politics, and who felt deeply threatened by Marcus's meritocratic and often unpredictable leadership style. Over expensive glasses of scotch, Richard laid out his version of events, cloaking his fear in the language of corporate concern. "It's his judgment," David Richards said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "He's acting erratically. The elevator incident was a symptom of a larger problem: infrastructure neglect. But instead of addressing it, he publicly dismisses me and sequesters a janitor in a private office." A janitor. Peterson leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. "Who is she? Nobody?" Richard sneered. "That's the point. She's an immigrant, an old woman with no background, no credentials, and he's giving her unprecedented access. The investors have a right to know if the man leading this company is becoming unstable. The board needs to be guided." "What are you suggesting?" Peterson asked, though he already knew the answer. "A leak," Richard said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "A well-placed anonymous story. Not an attack, just an expression of concern from internal sources. We plant a seed of doubt. The board will do the rest." 3 days later, the seed sprouted. As Marcus sat in his office, reviewing quarterly projections, a notification flashed on his tablet. It was from ByteStream, a notoriously aggressive tech blog famous for its inside scoops and brutal takedowns. The headline made his blood run cold. "Chaos at Ethelred CEO's erratic behavior sparks internal fears." His hands trembled slightly as he read the article. It was a masterful piece of character assassination. It cited anonymous sources high within the company who expressed grave concerns. It painted the elevator incident not as a citywide power failure, but as a symptom of failing Ethelred infrastructure. It framed Marcus's dismissal of Richard as the impulsive firing of a rising star. And it spoke of a mysterious new advisor, an unvetted low-level employee who was now exerting a strange and powerful influence over the CEO. The article didn't make any direct accusations, but it didn't need to. It was a cloud of expertly crafted poison designed to undermine confidence and invite scrutiny. As if on cue, his private line buzzed. It was Julian Croft, the lead director of the board. Marcus Julian's voice was tight with alarm. "I'm looking at an article from ByteStream. I'm getting calls from shareholders. What the hell is going on over there?" The attack was real. The undercurrent had surfaced. That same evening, Frank, the security guard, was making his final rounds in the executive parking garage. It was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the building's ventilation systems. As he passed a secluded corner, he heard a voice. Richard's voice. He was on his phone, his tone no longer panicked, but smug and conspiratorial. "The board is in a frenzy," Richard was saying, a low chuckle in his voice. Julian Croft called an emergency session for Friday. "The first domino has fallen, David. By the time we're done, they'll be begging Marcus to step aside for the good of the company." Frank froze in the shadows. He was a simple man. He had worked for this company for 30 years. He believed in doing his job, keeping his head down, and staying out of the politics of the upper floors. But he had been in that elevator. He had seen Richard's cowardice. He had seen Elena's quiet, astonishing genius. He had seen the look on Marcus Vance's face, not of a CEO, but of a man seeing a miracle. And now he heard the smug voice of the liar who was trying to burn it all down. He stood there for a long time, the weight of what he had heard settling in his gut. It was a conflict between his professional duty to forget what he'd heard and a deeper human duty to the truth. He looked at his own tired reflection in the polished black finish of a nearby limousine. For the first time in 30 years, Frank knew he had a choice to make. Marcus did not wait for the storm to break. He walked directly into it. He found Elena on the 72nd floor, standing by the window of the empty office, looking down at the city that had been her hiding place for 3 decades. He was holding a tablet, the screen glowing with the poison pen article from ByteStream. He didn't offer apologies for the world's cruelty or platitudes about things getting better. He offered her the truth. "They're coming after me," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. He placed the tablet on a nearby table. "And they are using you as the weapon." Elena read the article, her expression unreadable. There was no flicker of fear or surprise, only a deep, weary resignation. It was the look of someone who had seen this play out before, in another country, in another lifetime. "This is how it begins," she said softly, her eyes still on the screen. "They cannot attack the truth, so they create a story. Once the story is loud enough, the truth no longer matters." Marcus felt a surge of respect for her clarity. She saw the game board as clearly as he did. This was the moment he had to make a choice to shield her or to arm her. He chose the latter. "They see you as a threat," he said, his voice dropping, gaining an intensity that made her look up from the tablet. "Good." He met her gaze, and for the first time he was not the CEO, and she was not the janitor. They were two survivors. Let's give them something to truly be afraid of. I am not asking you to hide Elena. I am asking you to fight her. A spark dormant for 30 years ignited in the depths of her intelligent blue eyes. It was the fire of the Grandmaster, the programmer, the genius who had been told to disappear. It was the fire of Elena Petrova. She gave him a single firm nod. "What do you need me to do, Richard's power base, inside this company?" Marcus explained, pacing the room, is a project called Titan. It's a next-generation logistics AI that's supposed to revolutionize our supply chain. It's also 2 years behind schedule, and nearly $3 billion over budget. He's built his entire kingdom on a foundation of bad code and bureaucracy, burying any report that suggests it's failing. I want you to tear it down to the studs. He handed her a secure, unmarked laptop. This will give you anonymous top-level access to the entire project. The source code, the internal reviews, the developer logs, everything. For the first time in 30 years, Elena sat before a terminal as herself. She ignored the sleek, graphical user interface and opened a simple black command line window. To anyone else, it would look archaic. To her, it was home. Her fingers, which had grown accustomed to the grip of a mop handle, found their old rhythm on the keyboard. It was a masterclass in motion. She didn't just read the millions of lines of code. She inhaled them. She saw the architecture not as a series of files, but as a living, breathing entity, a diseased one. She saw the clumsy patches, the redundant subroutines, the thousands of lines of code acting as digital band-aids over a single fundamental wound. After only a few hours, she found it. The core problem wasn't some complex, hidden bug. It was the foundational algorithm, the very heart of the system. It was inefficient, bloated, and fundamentally flawed the work of a committee, not a creator. Richard hadn't built a Titan. He had built a golem stitched together from mismatched parts and held together by sheer corporate inertia. She began to write her report. It was not a long, rambling corporate document. It was 2 pages of pure, devastating logic. She outlined the foundational flaw, and then she proposed the solution, a new core algorithm, no more than 50 lines of code that was so elegant and efficient it would make 80% of Project Titan's existing code obsolete. It would increase performance by a factor of 500. It was the 9 lines of code from the elevator magnified 1,000 times over. It was a silver bullet. While Elena was rediscovering her purpose, Frank, the security guard, was wrestling with his. He was a man who had built a life on not getting involved. He saw everything from his post, behind the security monitors, the ambitious rises, the quiet falls, the secret affairs, the petty politics. He recorded it all, logged it, and forgot it. It wasn't his world. But this was different. He had seen Elena's quiet miracle. He had heard Richard's smug conspiracy. To remain silent now felt less like professionalism and more like cowardice. He made his decision. He knew he couldn't go through official channels. Richard had allies who would bury any report he filed. He had to go to the top. He waited until the end of his shift when he knew Marcus would be leaving for the day. He caught him in the private underground garage just as the billionaire was about to step into his armored sedan. Mr. Vance Frank said, his voice steady. Marcus turned, surprised to be approached. Frank held out a small, unmarked data chip. "I don't get involved in the affairs of the 80th floor, sir. but I was a Marine for 10 years. I don't like seeing a good soldier get ambushed by a coward." Marcus looked at the chip, then at the old security guard's tired but determined eyes. He understood the immense risk Frank was taking. "The P4 garage security logs from last night," Frank said quietly. "The audio is very clear. You never got this from me." Marcus took the chip, his fingers closing around the small piece of plastic. He gave Frank a single meaningful nod, a look of profound, unspoken gratitude. "Your long service to this company is noted, Frank," he said. And it was a promise. Later that night, Marcus sat alone in his penthouse office, the city lights a blur below. On one monitor was Eleanor's 2-page report, a document of such brilliant simplicity it was a work of art. On another, he played the audio from Frank's data chip. Richard's voice filled the silent room, smug and triumphant, damning himself with every word. Marcus leaned back, looking from the elegant solution to the ugly conspiracy. He now had the two things he trusted most in the world: irrefutable data and the element of total surprise. The defensive posture he had held for the past week was gone. Now he was the hunter. He glanced at the calendar on his desk. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. A cold, determined smile touched his lips for the first time in days. "All right, Richard," he whispered to the empty, silent room. "Let the games begin." The boardroom on the 81st floor of Ethelred Tower was less a room and more a declaration of power. A single monolithic table of black marble stretched down its length, flanked by imposing leather chairs that cost more than the average car. One entire wall was a sheet of smart glass, currently opaque, but ready to display the company's vast data streams at a moment's notice. It was a cold, intimidating space designed to make even the most powerful people feel small. Marcus sat at the head of the table, his face an unreadable mask of calm. The 10 members of the board were seated, their tension a palpable force in the room. Opposite him sat Richard and his ally, David Peterson, their expressions a carefully rehearsed blend of grave concern and quiet confidence. They believed they had him trapped. Julian Croft, the lead director, cleared his throat, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "Marcus," he began, his tone formal and strained. This emergency session was called in response to troubling reports. The article in Bytestream has caused significant unease among our shareholders. It alleges a pattern of unorthodox decisions and raises questions about stability. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The board requires a full explanation." Richard seized the opening. He rose smoothly to his feet, a picture of confident leadership. "If I may, Julian," he said, activating the holographic display at the center of the table. A dazzling 3-dimensional model of Project Titan's architecture sprang to life. For the next 20 minutes, Richard put on a masterclass in corporate misdirection. He spoke of synergistic realignments, proactive infrastructure scaling, and navigating emergent paradigm shifts. The presentation was a flood of impenetrable jargon, complex charts, and dazzling graphics, all designed to obscure a simple truth: the project was a colossal failure. He admitted to minor timeline deviations, but masterfully blamed them on unprecedented market volatility and supply chain disruptions. He painted himself not as a failing manager, but as a steadfast captain navigating a treacherous storm. Peterson nodded sagely at all the right moments, adding his support. The other board members, few of whom truly understood the deep technology involved, were beginning to be swayed. They saw a confident executive with a complex plan, and a CEO who had, by all appearances, panicked. Julian turned his gaze back to Marcus. "Marcus, this is a lot to process. In light of the project's complexities, your recent and very public dismissal of Mr. Richard, and the unusual promotion of a non-vetted employee, the board must consider a motion to temporarily review your executive authority, pending a full internal audit. The checkmate was declared. The ambush was complete. Marcus let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply held up a hand. "Before you vote," he said, his voice calm and steady, cutting through the tension like a scalpel, "I agree that you have not been given the full picture. There is one more consultant on Project Titan, whose expert opinion you have not yet heard." He gave a slight nod to the boardroom doors. Puzzled, the board members turned. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Elena Petrova walked in. The effect was instantaneous and profound. A collective stunned silence fell over the room. The sight was so incongruous it was surreal. An old woman in a simple dark dress and sensible shoes, clean, neat, but utterly out of place, walked with quiet dignity into the heart of corporate power. Richard's face went white as a sheet. Peterson looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. "Marcus, what is the meaning of this?" Julian demanded, finding his voice. "This is a closed board meeting." This, Marcus said, his voice, ringing with an authority that left no room for argument, is the most brilliant systems architect I have ever had the privilege of meeting. He gestured to the chair beside him, an honor no outside consultant had ever been given. Elena sat. Richard finally found his voice sputtering with rage. "This is absurd. This is a farce. She's a janitor." Marcus ignored him, his eyes on Eleanor. "Eleanor," he said gently, "would you be so kind as to give the board your assessment of Project Titan?" Eleanor didn't look at the complex holographic model. She looked directly at the faces of the board members. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but it carried across the silent room with absolute clarity. "Project Titan is not a complex project," she began. "It is a simple project that has been made complicated by a fundamental mistake." She picked up a water glass from the table. "Imagine this is your data pipeline. You have a blockage here," she said, pointing to the bottom of the glass, a small one at the very beginning. Instead of clearing the blockage, the managers of this project have spent 2 years and $3 billion building bigger pipes, stronger pumps, and complex overflow systems all around it. But the blockage is still there. The system will never work efficiently. It is not a storm that is sinking your ship. The hole was drilled from the inside. She then placed her 2-page report on the table. "This is the blockage," she said, pointing to the flawed core algorithm. "And this is how you fix it." The simplicity was devastating. Her analogy had done what Richard's 20-minute presentation could not. It made the problem clear to everyone. Richard, now desperate, shot to his feet, his face red with fury. "This is insane. You're going to listen to this? This nobody. She has no degree, no credentials. He's losing his mind. I tell you, he's putting the entire company at risk." Marcus let him finish his tirade. He let the accusations of insanity and fraud hang in the air. Then he looked at Richard, his expression cold as ice. "You're right about one thing," Richard Marcus said quietly. "The board should be deeply concerned about compromised judgment, specifically yours." He tapped his tablet. A new audio file began to play through the boardroom's sophisticated sound system. Richard's own voice, smug, conspiratorial, and crystal clear, filled the room. "The board is in a frenzy. The first domino has fallen, David. By the time we're done, they'll be begging Marcus to step aside for the good of the company." The color drained from Richard's face. He looked at Peterson, who seemed to shrink in his chair. The other board members turned to look at them, their expressions shifting from confusion to dawning horror, and then to pure, undiluted fury. They had been played. They had been used as pawns in a petty backstabbing power play. The game was over. Julian Croft rose slowly to his feet, his face a thunderous mask of contempt as he stared at Richard. He didn't shout. He spoke in a low, shaking voice that was far more terrifying. "Get out." Richard and Peterson scrambled from their chairs and practically fled the room, leaving a wake of stunned silence. The gambit was won. Marcus stood at the head of the table, his authority not just restored, but forged anew in the fire of the confrontation. He looked across the gleaming marble at Elena, who sat there with the same quiet, unshakable dignity she had shown from the very beginning. The battle was over. The undercurrent had been exposed, and in the silent, powerful boardroom, a new order had just been born. The fallout in the boardroom was swift and silent. After Richard and Peterson had scrambled from the room in disgrace, the remaining board members sat in a state of stunned, horrified clarity. The coup had not only failed, it had spectacularly backfired, exposing the rot within their own ranks. Marcus didn't waste a moment. His voice, now calm and lethally precise, cut through the silence as he spoke into his comms. "Corbin, escort Mr. Richard and Mr. Peterson from the premises. Their access to all Ethelred systems is revoked, effective immediately. Have their personal effects packed and couriered to their homes. I don't want either of them setting foot in this building again." He then turned to the board. "The official minutes of this meeting will be sealed. As far as the public is concerned, their departure is a voluntary resignation for personal reasons. We will not be defined by this company's betrayals, but by how we move forward from them." It was a command, not a suggestion. The board members, now unified behind him, nodded in agreement. His authority was no longer in question. It had been forged into something unbreakable. He finally looked across the vast marble table at Elena, who had remained silent throughout the entire ordeal, a bastion of quiet dignity in a room of shattered egos. The board members followed his gaze, their expressions now a mixture of awe and profound respect. Elena Marcus said softly, his voice echoing in the quiet room, "Will you walk with me?" That afternoon, a notification for a mandatory company-wide video conference went out. Rumors were already flying through the internal chat channels about the sudden departure of 2 senior VPs. When Marcus appeared on the giant screen in the company's main atrium, thousands of employees across the globe tuned in expecting a sterile corporate statement. But Marcus wasn't standing behind his desk on the 81st floor. He was standing on a simple, unadorned stage, looking directly into the camera. His expression was not one of triumph, but of deep solemnity. "Good afternoon," he began. "For years we have defined ourselves at Ethelred by 3 core values: innovation, logic, and a relentless pursuit of talent. We search for talent in the world's top universities, we recruit it from our competitors, and we reward it with promotions and bonuses." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But today I have to admit that we as a company, and I as its leader, have been suffering from a form of blindness. We have been looking for genius in all the conventional places, expecting it to arrive with a prestigious degree and an impressive resume. We have failed to see the brilliance that walks among us every single day, hidden in plain sight by the uniforms we ask people to wear and the job titles we assign them." A murmur went through the watching crowd. This was not the kind of speech they had ever heard from their famously unsentimental CEO. Effective today, Marcus continued his voice, resonating with conviction. "I am announcing the formation of a new independent division at Ethelred. It will be called the Petrova Initiative. Its sole mission will be to pursue elegant, human-centric solutions to our most complex technological challenges. It will be a place where Logic, creativity, and proven brilliance are the only credentials that matter. He then gestured to the side of the stage. And leading this initiative is a woman who 30 years ago became my first and most important mentor. Elena Petrova walked onto the stage. A collective audible gasp rippled through the thousands of watching employees. They recognized her. She was the cleaning lady from the night shift, the quiet woman from the service corridors. She stood beside the billionaire, not in a uniform, but in a simple, dark dress, her posture radiating a quiet strength that commanded the attention of the entire company. Some of you may have seen Ms. Petrova in our hallways, Marcus said, his voice now filled with a deep personal respect. What you did not see was the mind of a grandmaster, a PhD in computational mathematics, and a systems architect of unparalleled genius. For 13 years she has walked among us, her immense talents, hidden by our own assumptions and our own blindness. Today that blindness ends. He turned to her. Please welcome the head of the Petrova Initiative, Ms. Elena Petrova. Weeks later the noise had faded. The Petrova Initiative was now a reality, housed in a clean, minimalist lab on the 75th floor. It was a space of whiteboards and powerful terminals, a sanctuary for pure thought. Elena had found a new uniform, simple, comfortable trousers and a crisp shirt. She looked at peace. Marcus entered her lab, the old awkwardness between them, replaced by an easy camaraderie. They stood side by side at a whiteboard, sketching out an idea, their conversation flowing easily between complex theory and shared memories. They were no longer CEO and employee. They were partners. After a while, Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out the old broken watch. He placed it gently on the workbench between them. I have a personal project, he said, a rare vulnerability in his voice. A legacy system with a critical flaw. It's been 5 minutes behind for as long as I can remember. I was always told the core mechanism was irreparable. Elena picked it up. She looked at it not as a piece of jewelry, but as a machine with a logical problem. She opened a small velvet-lined case on her desk that contained a set of antique watchmaking tools. With a delicate touch, she opened the back of the watch. For a long moment, she simply studied the intricate dance of gears and springs, her mind mapping the flow of kinetic energy. Then, with a pair of fine-tipped tweezers, she made a single infinitesimal adjustment to a tiny escapement spring, a correction so small it was almost invisible. She closed the case wound the crown and held it to her ear. A steady, perfect ticking filled the quiet lab. She slid it back across the table to him. Done, she said simply. Marcus strapped the watch to his wrist. He listened to the crisp, clean rhythm of a machine finally made whole. He looked down at the perfectly synchronized hands, then up at Elena. A genuine, unguarded smile, the first she had ever truly seen from him, spread across his face. He spoke in a low, deadpan voice. Good, he said. At least one of my old systems is working again without needing 9 lines of code. Elena laughed. It was a warm, clear sound that filled the entire room, the sound of a long winter finally ending. Some broken things, she replied, her eyes twinkling with a shared understanding, are the most important ones to keep. He smiled back. They both turned to the massive whiteboard, covered in the elegant architecture of their next creation. He picked up a black marker, and she picked up a blue one. And together, side by side, the student and the mentor began to design the future. How many geniuses are hiding behind the simple uniforms we walk past every single day? A broken watch can be fixed. But how do you ever make up for 30 years of forgotten talent? The story of Marcus and Elena isn't just about finding a hidden gem. It's a journey of atoning for a debt from the past and of healing for two people, one who had to learn how to be seen again, and one who had to learn how to truly see. If their emotional journey touched you in some way, let us know in the comments. What detail in the story moved you the most? Was it the moment Elena typed those 9 lines of code? Or when Marcus publicly called her his mentor? If you or someone you love have ever felt overlooked despite your own hidden talents, please share your story below. You never know who might need to read it today. A simple like is a powerful way to support stories like this. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to join us on more emotional journeys to come. Thank you for listening. And remember, the greatest talents are often found not in the spotlight, but in the places we forget to look.